welcome everyone to another Chat and Learn here with Power to Fly. My name is Mariella Marie, and as always, super excited to roll into this next hour with you all. We've got Rachel back in action. We had a really great conversation with her. It seems like yesterday, but I guess it was, I don't know, we were like, what is time? What does time even mean? I guess we chatted at the end of the year last year, and so she had so much great content and information to share that we wanted her to come back. So I'm really appreciative for those of you who are joining today. And so just because the hour is going to fly by super quickly, I want to go over some quick housekeeping rules so that we all stay comfortable and confident in this next hour. So if you are joining us live, thank you so much for joining. If you're rewatching this, thank you for rewatching. If you are live with us, you can participate in a number of ways. You can turn on your cameras if you feel called to do so. I know that video fatigue is real, but this is, we want this to be an open dialogue, open conversation. We're happy to speak at you, but we don't want to. We want you to join the conversation. So you can participate by turning your cameras on. This is a safe digital space. I kick people out if they're not respectful of our voices. And I believe in visibility. So you have full permission from me to turn cameras on. I see some folks are doing that. Shout outs to you all. If you don't want to come off camera, it's okay. You can write in the chat box anything that's coming up for you throughout this hour. So any questions, any reflections, any of your own tips and tricks that you want to share, any resources, of course, please use this opportunity to build meaningful connections in the chat box. I'll be extending an invitation shortly for you all to drop your preferred ways of connecting, because I really like to use this time to, practice meaningful connections. And as everything is changing in the world, we want to make sure that we have the support that we can get from, like-minded folks here. So you have full permission to drop things in the chat. If anyone has any sensitive information and you prefer to be kept anonymous, you can find me in the chat box under Mariella Marie, and you can write to me privately there, and I'll raise your question or your reflection to our guest speaker and keep you anonymous. If you signed up for this chat, be looking out for a rewatch email. That rewatch email will include a link to this video that is being recorded right now for you to access and then share with your community, with your peers, with your colleagues. It will also have any resources that our guest speaker might mention throughout the hour so that you can access them as well there. All right, so the last thing I'll say is we'd love for you to follow Power to Fly on socials and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can keep up with all the great chats we've got in store. And if this is your first time joining where I am moderating, looks like I've got my slides mixed up, so thanks for that flexibility there. I'll just take a couple seconds to introduce myself. So my name is Mariella Marie, as I mentioned before, originally from Los Angeles, California, currently live in Patagonia in Argentina, the original land of the Mapuche people. And I love speaking about the importance of emotional intelligence at home, at work, and at play. A lot of people are trying to shift this conversation from talking about soft skills and calling it soft skills to naming them power skills and essential skills. So if anyone wants to philosophize with me on emotional intelligence and share actionable tips, please feel free to use the chat box as well. Otherwise, I invite you to support the project that I'm working on that is called the Positive Force Team. You can go to thepositiveforceteam.org. You can sign up for our newsletter, or I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn. And just remember, in just a few moments, I'm going to invite you all to connect with each other in the chat box. So whether that be your LinkedIn or your website or any preferred way of, building your social capital, as they call it, grab those links, get ready to drop them in the chat box. I really want you to participate today with us. All right. So enough said. I'm going to pass the mic to our awesome speaker who's calling from New York City, Rachel. I know it hasn't been too long since you've been here, but for those who are just now joining, would love for you to share a little bit about yourself. Again, remind us how you came to learn about Power to Fly and what you're excited to share with us today, Rachel.
Yes. How I learned about Power to Fly. I'm going to have to remember that one. To be perfectly honest, I think I was helping a client of mine who, leverages Power to Fly's community, and then started looking into it, and we started exploring some partnerships and events. Quickly just sharing my background. I started out in the finance world. I worked at Goldman Sachs and Bridgewater Associates, but I was really informally career coaching on the side of my job for years. And eventually I realized, you know what, I enjoy doing this. I think I'm adding value to people. I'm good at it, and I want to dive deeper. So that was sort of hundreds of informal conversations. Eventually I got trained and certified as a coach. And that's really when I kind of dove deeper into how can I actually build out digital tools to really make it easier for people to be really intentional with their career decisions. So that's been my company for over 4 years. We are building a platform for career exploration amongst other career processes. I've done career coaching at other organizations. I've also done a tech MBA at NYU Stern. I teach an entrepreneurship class, and that's the quickest version of me.
Great. Awesome. I know you're probably going to dive deeper as well when we go through these questions, because folks have submitted some great questions previous to this chat. So we want to make sure that we get as many questions answered today. But I would love for you to set the stage for today's conversation, and then we'll roll into the questions.
Yes. So continuing to identify your best fit path, like, to me, that's kind of my number one thing that's so important for, like, how can you really practically clarify the best fit role, best fit industry, best fit environment that you want to go into as your next career step or your broader path. To me, that's like my number one passion that I want to make sure people feel informed about. Efficient and strategic job searching, that's important, right? In terms of how can we make sure that when you do start applying and interviewing, that you know where to spend your time and you know how to effectively land the role. Job searching can be stressful, and people, sometimes are applying practices without leveraging some strategic guidance. So I want to make sure you feel like you know what to do properly in job search. And readiness to make a move, your mindset and assessing whether it's the right time or how to just navigate, how to figure out, whether to start exploring this, when to start exploring it, how to start exploring it. Your mindset is a big part of this. Your accountability is a big part of it, and how to make this all happen. So we could pretty much talk about anything career related, but those are the areas that we'll try to hone in on.
I love that. And I would love to just get a sense of our live callers today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Is there a particular question we can ask just to see where people are? Like, I want to say, like, put in a number 1 if you are just considering it, shifting careers. Maybe put in a 2 if you're like in the weeds, like looking for, like, tomorrow you want to start something different. So let's say 1, you're considering it. This is for our live audience. Drop in a 1 if you're considering it, changing careers. 2 if you are like ready to start tomorrow in a new career, just waiting on that interview opportunity. All right, so we got a couple 1s, couple 2s. Someone says they're in the weeds. Great. So it looks like pretty balanced here. Yeah, mixed crew here. All right, so y'all, we're gonna dive into these questions that you all have submitted. If you hear your question come up, let us know you're here. If you have a question that comes to mind, in the moment, maybe you didn't get a chance to submit it before this conversation, or Rachel says something that makes you think of a dream that you had last night and you want to share it, please use the chat box, drop anything there, and I will raise that to our guest speakers awareness. And just before we start, I want to shout out where folks are calling from so you get a sense of where we are in the world. So of course, Rachel from New York City. I'm calling from Patagonia in Argentina. We've got Chicago representing. We've got New York City, Kentucky, Vancouver, New Jersey, New York again, Phoenix, Arizona, Metro Atlanta, Buenos Aires, Argentina. Great. So if you're just joining us, you can also just let us know where you are in the world. Drop that in the chat. And remember, in just a few moments, I'm going to invite you all to network in the chat box as well. So let's start with this first question here. I would love to just, you've done such a beautiful job of breaking up these questions into themes. So we're going to talk right now about career exploration. That's what we're going to focus on now. So let's start with this first question. As an exploration coach, what would you recommend first in terms of planning our next career move?
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to share actually a slide really quickly for this question, because I want to introduce a concept from the foundational perspective, and then I can speak to it, but I want to actually define it for you guys and show it to you. And also, Marielle, it might be helpful. I don't know if we have the link handy from the January session. Maybe we can put that in the chat, because we did host a part 1 of this in January, and that might be a really good rewatch for you guys. I mean, today's going to be great as well, but if you want to kind of dive into these same topics too, there was even more that we did in that one, and it's a similar topic. Okay. So here's what you would do if you are starting to figure out your next move. Here's where I recommend beginning. And by the way, this can happen for anyone at any tenure or any stage. I like to encourage what I call career exploration before you job search, right? And that's the beginning of the process that I would recommend, right? So the way I define it is, and you can see my slide, correct? Okay, great. So career exploration, I've literally defined this. It is a process that is distinct from and a precursor to the job search. It is a series of steps of learning and reflection in order to compare, contrast, and clarify which path you are confident in pursuing, or you could replace, instead of which path, which next step you are confident in pursuing. And that relates to the role, the industry, and the environment. And so this could take you a week, it could take a month, it could take 2 to 3 months. But the whole point is that before you start applying anywhere, you want to make sure, and I'm here to remind and tell you that it is feasible to get to that, feasible and encouraged to get to the point of confidence in what next step you actually want, what's going to be a fit for you. And that literally just requires a bit of space and time and structure to explore, learn, research, network, reflect, and get to the point of feeling like, okay, I know which role and which industry makes sense for me. So when you're starting your process, career exploration is the beginning of that process. I like to talk about, why is it so important to do this before the job search? It's going to make your job search more efficient. It's going to make it more effective when you interview and you have to tell your story. And it's going to increase the odds that you actually enjoy the job once you get it. I'm going to go through like very quickly, what is career exploration? And then I'll get back to all the other questions, but I think this will be helpful. So the first step of career exploration is committing to the journey. Like if you're sort of ready to say, you know what, I need to figure out what I want, that's half the battle, right? Is just deciding you're going to spend X amount of time to actually go get those answers to your questions, right? The next part is reflecting. And in our last session, we did a guided reflection exercise. So let me know if you guys want to hear more about that. But basically what I would reflect on is, there's really 3 parts of reflection. One is what I call function, which is your affinities, your tendencies, your skills. What are you natural at? What are you great at? What gives you energy? The second area of reflection is what I call content, which is the topic areas or the problem areas that you find important and interesting in this world. And the third is the environment that you thrive in. What should it look and feel like? Once you start to reflect on that from the root of it, in the sense of like, what am I really, what is, you want to be really open-ended with your initial reflection, and then say, okay, which roles and industries actually relate to these reflections, to my affinities, right? And you come up with options. Many other career assessments will spit out an answer and expect that to be, the answer. The way I look at it is that let's come up with some options that feel relevant and viable. And then what I want you to do is go learning about those options, go learn about them. I find that most people don't have the clarity on what it is they want next because they haven't learned enough either about themselves and in conjunction with learning about the options that they're considering. So research is something that we often do for like weeks, months, years on end. I want you to try to compound the research in just a short time period and combine it with networking. Networking is the crux of meeting with professionals who are in the roles and industries to actually accurately understand, what they do, so that you can effectively compare and contrast the roles and figure out which is the best possible fit. There is a bit of experiential learning, and I know you guys asked a lot of questions about experiential learning, and there's a lot of good ways of deciding what type of course or certification or graduate degree is relevant for you. I like to leave that a little bit towards the end of the process because there's only so many courses or certifications you can do. So while shadowing or taking a course or any hands-on learning can be a helpful way to assess a path, like I said, you can't take every single course. So I like to do research and networking until you feel like 95% sure about a certain path. Then you could dive into some hands-on learning, test it out, get a feel for it, get your hands exposed to it. And reflection and iteration is key. What I usually recommend is that when you're going through this process, you're doing research and networking in what I call an iterative fashion. So every single week when you're learning, you're actually going to reflect on what you're hearing and use that to inform, who do I want to talk to next week? What do I want to learn more about or less about? Sometimes I'll have clients where you'll learn about roles that you thought sounded interesting. And then when you learn about it, you're like, actually, I don't want that. So there's yeses and there's nos. And then you get to that point of clarifying your direction. That's when you can start your job search. And that's what's going to lead you to that job fulfillment. So in a nutshell, that's kind of like the high level process of career exploration. I know there's probably a million more questions, but I'll pause there for now.
Well, no, it's great. And I definitely recommend folks rewatch that and maybe take a screen grab and like journal on those points. And to one of those points that you mentioned about networking, like I said in the introduction, I would love if you all could use this time to build meaningful conversations, drop your preferred ways of connecting in the chat box. I put my link there. And thank you, Sarah, for also taking that initiative to drop your link. So, I definitely recommend you all drop your preferred ways of connecting, reach out to a couple of people, be respectful, please. Remind them that you joined this conversation so that you can, try to see, that you have something in some commonalities, and then build from there. And maybe if you want to role play with like, okay, I'm looking for this job, but I don't really know how to do an interview. I'm really uncomfortable with virtual blah, blah, blah. Or can you take a look at my resume? Or I don't know, you all can get creative there. All right. So I see folks are doing that. Great. Now, loving everything that you shared your screen. I'm a visual learner, so I really appreciate that. And I would just love to move on to this next question about time, the big question: how much time should we take with all of these points? So this question reads, I know there will be variation, but can you give a general timeline of how long each or some of these steps to approach a career change might take?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's a lot of levers for how to adjust that timeline, right? So number one, any career pivot, you want to look at how relevant your prior experience is, right? Obviously, if it's more relevant, it's going to be a little easier. If it's a bigger change, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm not saying it's going to take longer. It's just a potential factor. So A, like your relevance of your background, B, just kind of the time that you put in. To be perfectly honest, like a lot of this stuff is really self-paced. So for example, I think career exploration, on average, when I guide somebody through that process that we just talked about, it takes about 2 to 3 months, give or take. However, I have had somebody who was not working, and she literally just did that process full time, and it took a month. So the point is, it takes a little time, but it also doesn't need to take forever, and it shouldn't take forever. You have to ask yourself, if I'm at 70% certainty or 80% certainty, what's going to get me to 100%? Is it more learning, more reflection, or both? And so it shouldn't take forever, right? That being said, if you have more time, in a given day, if you're not working, whatever it is, I have clients who are working full-time and they'll do this in addition. Maybe it's 20, 30 minutes a day. So figuring out, what your goal is, if it's career clarity or upskilling or whatever, and then getting that right support system to help you stay on track is really the key. Like, we could talk about how long it takes, but really the bigger question is like, what is your sense of accountability and support? That's actually probably the most important. So after career exploration, give or take between 1 and 3 months to clarify your direction, then there's upskilling. Sometimes people will go into a course or certification or a boot camp. That could take, it depends on the program, right? I've seen programs that take a month or 2 or 3 or 6 months, or sometimes there's graduate degrees that are a year or 2. The upskilling decision that you make and how long that is to make your pivot depends on, again, learning from professionals to make sure you understand what path you want and which upskilling opportunity is reputable and worthwhile. We want to be informed with any upskilling decision. So the length of time to actually learn the skills you need depends. Personal branding is an element of the job search. That's the resume, cover letter, LinkedIn, professional summary. I think that stuff could take 2 weeks. If you have a coach, if you have the right support, I don't want you to spend a crazy amount of time on your materials. If you know how to do it well, get it done, get it strong, and get it out of the way. Job search statistically takes about 4 months, give or take, but the levers here are really knowing the strategic guidance of what to do properly in job search, and then you can just like, it's a volume game. You can do more of that. So when you know who you want to network with and how to effectively reach them, you can just do a lot more of that if you have the time. So there's levers of how to move faster. But generally 1 to 3 months to explore, generally 1 to 3 months to upskill, generally 4 or so months to job search. But that is really rough averages. Everyone's different. If you're making a big pivot, if you need some people need upskilling, some people don't. You could go straight into the job search. But I like to encourage exploration prior to job search. Sometimes I'll have people that will multitask. If you need a job like immediately, you will just go straight into job search. And the quickest way to get a job is to get the same one you had last time. But if you're looking to make a change, you want to give yourself the time to figure out what that change is. Do you understand the day-to-day? Do you understand the reality of how to break in? Networking is such a key to ask questions, to learn the nuanced reality of like, how do people actually break into those pathways and assessing those patterns? There's a whole separate thing we could talk about with networking of what are the proper questions to ask to get the accurate learnings. But that's like a high level timeline, give or take. Everyone's different. I hope that helps a little bit.
Yes. I love, it's not a one size fits all solution. And I think that what you're leaning on for a lot of this response is, that self-awareness, which if I could just rant a little bit about emotional intelligence, it's like, be self-aware. Of course, if you need the money now and you need to, fall back on the same things that you have done before, that's another question. But if you want to try to grow in the work that you do, how you share your time and energy and ideas and talent with other people, that self-awareness piece is key. So that exploration point, is key. And I know that we've got a lot of people in the beginning who dropped that they're at 1, which I for those of you who joined a little later, I said to drop a 1 if you're considering changing careers, or drop a 2 if you're like, you want to start tomorrow. So I think the ones who are in 1, definitely dive deeper into exploration. And of course, if you are needing it now, don't sleep on the fact that you need to explore, because that's equally as important. All right, let's move into this next question here. So we're going to get into more of the career pivoting pathway questions here. So how can we pivot to a new area or industry without starting from scratch?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first and foremost, like, again, I can't say enough, career exploration to deeply understand where you want to go is half the battle. Like, I've seen people pivot with a deep understanding of what role is a fit for them. Even if it's a new change, if you deeply research and learn about what that role is and like genuinely know that it's a fit for you, when you show up that way in an interview, you are the best person there, because most people show up in an interview and they just tell the person what they want to hear. And the other person can feel that, right? Like, so if you're like really, really like, and again, that's why career exploration, you're basically answering the interview questions for yourself. If you can answer for yourself, why are you a fit for this role? The other person's going to believe you in a much more compelling way because you believe you. And so deeply understanding the pathway is half the battle of pivoting. Then when you understand where you want to go, your personal branding there, if you have a coach or peer or mentor with LinkedIn resume, there's a lot of tricks and tips of how you can brand yourself in a way that sort of helps you present yourself, showing of that you're capable of going where you want to go, right? So there's a lot of tips of like how to present you on paper. And then upskilling is also part of this without starting from scratch, taking a course to like fill the gaps of knowledge. So you want to understand what are your current transferable skills that are relevant to the pathway you want to go. And you want to understand what are the gaps of things you need to add to your plate. Taking a course or certification and adding that to your LinkedIn or resume and talking about it during interviews is showing the interviewer that like, you know, a lot of this stuff, and whatever it is you're not sure of yet, or you're not an expert at, you're literally actively investing your time, money, and energy into filling those gaps. So personal branding, upskilling, clarity on your direction, and networking is also huge. Networking to get your foot in the door. I mean, that's just best practice for job search anyway. But without, so the other thing I'm thinking when I hear without starting from scratch, it's possible this person is alluding to, okay, what if you want to pivot and then you have to start from like entry level? Every role and industry is different. And sometimes a big pivot does require you starting from entry level. But if you look at your broader path and you're like, this is the thing I think I would want to do forever, and I'm okay to like go a little more junior right now because I know I'm going to rise quickly and I know that this is the path I really want to be in, it might be worth it. That being said, there's a lot of ways of pivoting where they can still recognize if you've managed people or if you've done things, again, that are transferable, that you have business experience, that you have people management experience, etc. And there are often times where you can laterally move to a different function or role while still showing that you're capable of, handling things because of your general tenure and your general experience as a professional. But deeply understanding what that role is and sort of how to compare that against your current skill set, and then how to fill the gaps and how to talk about it, your understanding of where you want to go and proving that you understand that role and what it requires, half the battle. So those are my initial thoughts, without starting from scratch. But, the only other thing I'll say is, again, just that nuanced understanding. When you're pivoting, networking can really help because you don't want to be searching for a job where like months later you realize that they only hire people with A, B, or C background. Like there are sometimes these unwritten patterns of how people get hired into certain roles, and networking is going to help you understand that. So for example, maybe there's a certain role where like you need to start out in a company in team A, and then once you're in the company, you can internally move into team B. And how are you going to know that other than just talking to people and understanding how it typically works? So asking the right questions, meeting people, and understanding these things deeply is truly, truly the key to be efficient and effective to making that pivot happen.
Awesome. I love that. And I want to take it deeper there because I think that what you're touching on speaks to this next question here. So what are your thoughts on taking interim or bridge positions to gain the skills needed to transition to another position?
I think it's great in the sense that like, if you understand there's like an interim position that actually would help you to move into the position you want, I think that's great, because to me, that proves that you understand the roadmap, the pathway, the steps that are viable, and potentially like you're going in a direction. So I don't want you guys to feel like I have to go from A to Z. Sometimes it requires a step or two in between, but truly understanding like how it works or how somebody might suggest that you move into that. If you gather the patterns and knowledge and sort of examples from maybe 3, 4, 5, 10 professionals who are in that field of interest, then you're going to gather all that information. You're going to come up with these patterns and you're going to say, okay, here's how it typically works. If I start out as a program manager, maybe then I can move into project management. Or if I start out as whatever, I can move into whatever. Sometimes that's just how it works, but you really just want to uncover the nuances so that you're not trying to make this A to Z leap that will never happen. So again, the accurate understanding of these things by learning from professionals is your ammo to be efficient and strategic with sort of knowing what's next for you, right? And I think interim positions are great if you feel like you're like, that it is in line with that direction, that it's going to help you show your more relevant skills, that it's going to get you one step closer to where you want to go, then I'm all for it.
And also being open, right? Like the synergy that happens when you start to do something different and you have like someone appears or some new skill arrives that you didn't even consider or think of because you didn't have the mental space or you just didn't have the experience. So like that being open and being flexible while moving through spaces so that, we're not so hard on ourselves, because maybe it's like we know the exact title and role in this, but things are changing all the time, especially working, with technology and have several industries and how technology affects the roles and the tasks. So I love that now, more and more this conversation of pivoting careers is becoming, more of a hot topic, and we're bringing meaning to this topic because I know you all are seeing lots of things in the news about the Great Resignation. Clearly people are unhappy with, what's going on. And a lot of educators, especially, I'm like really interested in like teachers are like fed up. They're like, oh yeah, I want to move into something else, like they are, I'm done with teaching. And that just breaks my heart because a lot of these Educators are, just they've been, I mean, and we can speak about several industries, of course. So it's like, okay, let's talk about fintech, or let's talk about, any kind of way to help them share their transferable skills, specifically with that industry. But we can talk about several industries. And anyway, I'm ranting, but I want to move now into something that actually KT just dropped in the chat, and it rings well with moving on to just speaking of networking in general. So KT writes, what are the best networking strategies for virtual spaces? And that I'm maybe you even sent this previous question, KT. If not, we've got a lot of people asking the same question. So how do you network in a virtual environment for possibly moving to another team? And this could apply to a new industry as well.
Yeah. And first I just want to react to actually what you were saying, and then I'm going to answer the networking question. So I agree that like the willingness and openness to explore pivots is incredible, and I'm all for it. But I would be careful. I hear a lot of people say, I'm open to anything, or I'm open to any role, I'm open to any industry. And when I hear that, to me, that's a signal that you're not sure yet what it is that you want or what's a fit for you. So just be careful. I think openness to change is amazing, but just know that exploration can be a finite process where you get to an end outcome of certainty and confidence on what is good for you and what is right for you. And I think sometimes there's a misconception that being open is like, oh, I'll have more opportunities, but you're just going to be more confused, and then you're going to confuse every interviewer as well. So I'd rather you find more opportunities in line with what you know is right for you, right? But so networking, how do you network in a virtual environment for possibly moving to another team or industry? So it sounds like this person might be like potentially trying to move internally, but whether you're trying to move internally or externally, here's what I would say for networking best practices in a virtual world. Number one is understanding the types of people you can leverage. So there's your network and their network. So don't assume that you know who people know, like your neighbor, your friend, your family friend, your cousin, your doctor, whoever. I literally had a chiropractor once introduce me to someone that I ended up interviewing at, I forget, it was BlackRock, Blackstone, one of those financial firms. That was from my doctor. Like, that's just weird, right? So your network. Then there's warm connections. Do you have anything in common? Is there any hobbies or social clubs or religious groups or fitness groups or anything you're a part of where you can just, like, literally any human in your life pretty much can be a potential source of help. So warm connections, things in common. Your alumni network, if you don't already know how to use that on LinkedIn, go to your school's page, and then there's a little thing that says alumni. You can literally search, and usually university schools have tens of thousands of alumni. So type in the job title, type in the company, type in whatever it is. That is an amazing pool of people where you have something in common, and you get to find exactly who you need to reach. The last resort would be cold outreach, right? Do you not know them? Do they work in a job, or are they a recruiter? But I like to go from like hot to warm to cold, right? Your network, warm connections, cold connections, in that order. Now, the next piece of networking is, what do you say to them, and how and where do you reach out to them? I personally like to try to email more than LinkedIn message, just because LinkedIn messaging gets really inundated. But when you're asking them for help, I like to encourage focusing on learning from them. Even if you're in job search, I don't like to mention job search, because they may or may not have a role for you. But what can you do with that person? You can spend 20 minutes and learn from them. And learning is so crucial to make your job search more strategic, efficient, and effective. So learn from them, learn about their role, their team, their company, their industry, and then see if there's an opening. And by the way, there's a lot of openings that are not yet posted online. So see if they have an opening, or see if they can introduce you to someone else. So networking, it's building relationships, it's informational phone calls, learning from them, and then see where it can go. So understanding the type of people, understanding what to say and how and where to reach out to them, and then hosting those calls well. I mean, we could talk about what to ask, but I would focus on what it is you don't know, what it is you want to know. And also, it's a great way to assess a culture of a company before you work there. You might learn about a culture and say, you know what, I don't think I want to apply there anymore, right? Try to get to know the role, the team, the industry, the company, and that's a really, useful thing for you. And then see how they can help. So in a nutshell, that's kind of my networking guidance. But if I'm missing something, a particular area of networking, let me know and I can dive deeper.
Oh, I mean, I think the topic of just making those kinds of connections deserves, at least an hour, because there's so many ways, right? And so many things to keep in mind. So I know that you're just scratching the surface there, but I think that was helpful enough. And KT or anyone else, let us know if you'd like Rachel to dive in deeper there. But until then, until I see anything in the chat, let's move on to experiential learning. So getting the experience and skills. Sometimes my language is cross and then I sound like I'm crazy, but I am crazy and I'm proud of it. Okay, so let's talk about education. What's your take on using education to make our next career move? I'm wanting to pursue an MBA, but I'm a little nervous about leaving the stability of my current career and the risks of starting fresh post-graduation.
Yeah, so I have several blogs on this. So find me on social media. My Medium account has several blogs on how to think about graduate school, or really any upskilling decision. And the quick answer is doing career exploration to figure out your ideal career path, role, and industry is what you have to do first. When you do that, if you're certain about your direction and your path, it's going to make the choice for education that much easier, in the sense of like, you're going to know whether, based on your career goals, is education, further education, either necessary or beneficial. Something like an MBA is one of those extremely difficult questions that no one's ever going to have the answer to, of, is it really worth it? And you could look at it from a salary perspective, but you could also look at it from a personal networking perspective. Some schools have, like I did, a lot of entrepreneurial experiences. There's a lot of different things you can leverage in a graduate program. So clarify your career exploration, your career path first. See if that helps you to assess which, if any, further education program feels like it may help you achieve those goals, right? So when you're networking to understand your pathway, you're trying to understand what is the role, but you're also trying to understand how do people typically break in. There might be certain roles where it's like, you only hire MBAs, and then guess what? You have your answer. But there may be certain roles where it's like, yeah, we hire like 50-50, some grad students, some not. Or there may be a role where you're like, yeah, no, we don't really care about graduate programs. Getting that information from like 10 different people so you can assess the patterns of like, does this help me on my journey? To take it one step deeper, if it's an MBA, if it's a program where it's a bit subjective, literally use these same best practices. Network with current MBA students or alum of MBA programs, or you can use the same logic for any master's degree or any degree. Network with current students and alumni. Ask them, what was the program like? What was the benefits? Etc. The same way you would ask so many questions and you would have enough calls to feel certain about your career path, you can and should do the same exact thing with any upskilling program. And that goes for certifications, boot camps. Talk to current students or alum. Ask about the experience. Ask about the format. Ask about the program. Ask about the cohort. Ask about the pacing. Ask about the cost. Ask about the job search after. Ask about the resources. Ask about how it feels as an alum. Do they help you? Ask and learn enough, like turn your hesitations into questions and those questions into answers. With any and all career decisions, you can and should get to that point of feeling certain. And networking is a huge piece of that. Research will never be able to answer, should I get an MBA? But networking, when you're hearing experiences and you're asking questions of what's important to you and you hear it from different angles, that's when you can then walk away being like, okay, I have a lot of information now that I can use to decide like how I feel about all of this and what it means. And by the way, with many graduate programs, there's part-time, there's online, there's in person, there's full-time. There's so many different, variations too, that could make it more or less enticing and fitting for you too. I
think you're doing a great job answering. I want to like bridge this into, the question of someone who might be looking more into like technical certificates. So this question reads, in your opinion, are technical certificates more valuable than experience? What do you suggest if you need new skills for a career change, but don't have time or funds to go back to college or university?
So I'm not going to say certifications are necessarily more valuable than experience. Like in many instances, if you can do like a side gig or a pro bono project or volunteer shadow something, a personal project, if you can do something that's a real experience in your role of interest, that's an amazing way to pivot. Like it's funny. People sometimes forget, like, say you're trying to be a product manager, like, okay, like just be a product manager, like go do that. Either if that means like a personal project or like volunteering your time to go learn how to do that for free as like an intern for 2 to 3 months for a startup or something like that. So don't be afraid to just like start doing the thing. And so experience is really, really great and helpful. Certifications, I would really network in order to understand whether the hiring for that role looks favorably at certain certifications. And there might be certain technical roles where they really do want to see that you have this AWS thing or whatever. And so network to understand whether it's worthwhile for you. If you can get 3 to 5 to 10 opinions from people in the role you want to be in, that's the best form of answering that question. And then part of this question was, what do you suggest? We need new skills, but don't have the time or funds. So yes, I think it's the same as like exploring courses, certifications, volunteering, shadowing, pro bono, internships, any and all creative forms of exposing yourself to the field. You don't need necessarily a graduate degree, but again, I would just try to understand, like truly leverage networking to deeply understand what those people look for, as a way to inform what it is that you need to do next.
I love you set this next question up just perfectly here. So let's get into some interviewing focus. We've got some comments in the chat. I think that I can bridge to this next question here. So when making a career change, how do you convince a recruiter of your capacity for the new role or path where you have not had previous certifications or full-time experience? And Joseph also writes in the chat box here, basically, yeah, how can you gauge the level of proficiency in a given role? So maybe, as the person interviewing, or, I love this word, how can you convince the recruiter? I would change it up, and how can you showcase and demonstrate, so that you're not trying to convince anyone, because be empowered, everyone. Even if you don't think that you're going through imposter syndrome, or you're afraid to say that I don't meet 100% of the roles, or 100% of what's required here, but I'm confident, be confident in that. Don't try to convince anyone of your personal power and of your skills. So I'm just going to reframe that question there. I'll read it again. When making a career change, how do you present to a recruiter your capacity for the new role or path where you have not had previous certifications or full-time experience?
Yes. And by the way, I love what you were just saying, because even when you're in job search or just in life, notice the words you use, because if you're saying that you're convincing somebody, then like maybe you need to reframe it yourself. Cause like, are you convincing yourself? Also, are you convincing them? If you're sure, they'll be sure. So, and I think that begs the question of, are you prepared to make that case? And if you are, then you're simply showcasing it versus convincing. So I would look at how you phrase your own questions and see what that language tells you about how you feel, etc. So, okay, with recruiters or hiring managers or any interviews, if you're pivoting, again, deeply understanding what that role entails and requires, and the day-to-day and the projects and the skills. If you've learned from professionals and you have such a clear, accurate picture that you know what that role is going to look and feel like, if you were to walk in tomorrow, that is knowledge that you bring to a conversation. They just want to know in the interview that you, yes, ideally have skills and affinities that show capabilities of doing things, but it's also knowledge about what are the factors, what are the criteria, what do you consider as you look at these types of problems. Every role is solving a problem for someone. So like the way you go about that, do you understand what that role or person would have to be doing, considering, etc., right? Even if you've never done it, to show them that maybe there's 10 key factors that you would have to consider in some sort of project or problem or experience on the job. They just want to know that you're like thinking about the right things comprehensively so that they can trust you to sit there and operate independently, or that they know you're going to speak up and ask the right questions, or they know you're going to research and find the right resources if you don't already have them. So alluding to like this strong knowledge of what the role really is all about, what it entails, the factors, the processes, the resources, the tools, even if you haven't done it before, that knowledge can go a very long way, because you can then be trusted to go figure it out, right? Now, of course, you want to share stories as much as humanly possible in an interview of what's the most relevant story. Even if it's not a perfect alignment of when you've done it before, try to showcase times when you've utilized similar skill sets. And then at the end of that story, you can say, given that this situation is a little bit different, here's what I would do differently in this instance for your team, A, B, C, and D. So all of a sudden, you've got a similar story. You prove that you had some deliverable outcome result for that prior story. And then you show them that you know how it would be altered in this scenario. That's just one thing. I mean, there's so many things we could talk about in the sense of like, we could look at like all the interview questions. What are your strengths? And we could talk about interview strategy for all those questions. But I truly think the knowledge of what that role is all about goes a very, 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 very long way when you show up to that interview, right? They want to feel confident to trust you, to pay you, to do something. Do you understand what is required? And then show us the most relevant possible times when you've done similar things before.
I love that. And you know what? I've been in a situation, and I've also seen this happen in general. If you have the willingness to, you show what you've done in your life, your passions and all that, and you say, I know that I don't meet 100%, but you know what? I've seen data that specifically women are less likely to apply if they don't meet 100% of the requirements, and I'm trying to break that mold. I'm willing and able to learn. I think that a lot of people also want to see if you have that creative flexibility, and that you can take in new information. So I love that example of like saying, this is how I would do it, even though I don't have that direct experience. And then actually, this leads me into the next question here, which I would love to hear you speak about. How can we assess if a certain company is the right fit for us? And I want to hear you respond. And I also want to like do some bridges build some bridges with how you just reflected on the previous interview question. But how can we assess if a certain company is the right fit for us?
Yeah. This is really important, right? Role, industry, environment. Environment is underrated. Those people around you, the vibe, it's a make or break. And it affects everything. It affects your life. It affects your day-to-day. Like, please make sure the culture is a fit for you. And if you have to say no, say no. Like truly, truly, So assessing company, first of all, networking with somebody outside of your interview process is great, because they have no reason to like try to entice or convince you of their culture. Try to find somebody at the company, try to get an introduction. And that's a first point of this answer. Secondarily, I think you need to come up with creative, concrete questions. Don't just say, what's the culture? Because they're just going to give you like some like fake fluffy answer. Like, obviously everyone wants their culture to be great, but like we need to assess culture is the reality of the personality of a company. It's not what they say it is, it's what it actually is. So you have to assess that. The way to assess that is to ask yourself, what do you need in a culture? What do you want in a culture? What do you need in the people around you, the style, the values, the personality, the approach, the management, the empowerment, the diversity, inclusion, the support? What is it that you need? And try to make it realistic and specific. Like, you don't want to just say like, what's the management style? Like, what do you really mean by that? Do you mean it's someone checking in with me 10 times a day? Do you mean how often is the team collaborating? Do you mean what's the performance reviews and performance development process, promotion process? Do you mean like, I don't know, right? So ask yourself what it is you need, what you want, as specifically as humanly possible, and know that you can ask the same question 2 or 3 different ways if you're not getting the right answer. But also know that if you're not getting a good answer, that's an answer. So that, and also like, it's okay to be straightforward. If you want to understand like work-life balance, like just say like, what hours is the team typically working? Is there ever, how often are people expected to sort of log on in the weekends or the nights? Like, you can't beat around that. Just ask, and don't be afraid to ask each person The other thing too is like, if you feel like there's too many of these questions, because we all have too many of these questions, because it's important that we're treated properly. It's okay to like get that offer and then ask some of these things too after the fact, right? Prove that you're capable, clinch that thing, and then, you know, ask what you need, right? It's sometimes hard to balance. Like, you want to ask them questions about the work and the team and really impress them about like your thinking strategically. And then you want to sprinkle in questions about the culture. But that's why also networking with somebody outside of the interview process is helpful, because you can just like focus on all this kind of stuff. That's my quickest thoughts on that. I'm sure there's more I could think of, but
no, it's very helpful. And I mean, of course, I would love to have you on for hours, but we've got 8 minutes left. And I just want to make a quick connection to, you know, what your response to, you know, interviewing and asking certain questions and showing that you're capable, and also making sure that this is the right company for you. So if you see that a company is having some trouble or challenges in a certain area, let's say like, you know, diversity, equity, inclusion, you know, you do some market research and you say, this is how I can solve this problem that I know you're having because the data shows this.
yeah,
Is like help them find a solution to their current challenges. So, you know, I feel like that will automatically, you know, make someone think twice about, oh, wow, they've done their research. They're trying to help us solve something. And hopefully this can, you know, this can be a good, they, you know, interview, like hiring managers want to like hire the next right person. They don't want to like have a million different interviews. So like, you know, just help to build that bridge. So, and, you know, I think that this also can help companies practice accountability. You know, like if you really want to do, let's say DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion work, make sure that person, you know, who you're hiring also wants that, so that you can both hold each other accountable. Anyway, I'm ranting there. Let's move on to accountability. This is touching more on like the personal individual accountability for making this shift. So this question reads, could you share some advice on how to keep on track with the plan, especially when currently working in a different area than the aspirational role?
Yeah. So accountability is half the battle with any and all career goals, right? Especially if you're working full time. Like, this is an extra thing you're adding to your life. And it's because you're committed to your own growth and development, which is amazing, but it takes time and energy. And we've got to make it easy to stay on top of these things. So figuring out a support system, right? Coach, peer, mentor, group, peer-to-peer, co-working, whatever it is, figure out like a structure and a system and support whatever resources around you that you need. What type of format of support? Like, if you're only trusting yourself to do it, like I like to have like an outside mechanism of some sort to like add that support. Maybe it adds time in your week. Maybe every week you and a friend are doing it for an hour, or coach, mentor, peer. Like I said, there's a lot of different creative ways to get others involved. If you're solely left to your own devices, sometimes, you know, you want that extra support. So figuring out the format of support, figuring out your timeline for goals, right? Because if you're like, I need a job in a month, or you're like, oh, you know what, I'll go a little slower. The timeline is actually, you can reverse engineer, like, how much time do I then need or want to spend on a daily, weekly basis if my goal is to land in 3 months? Like, and sometimes a coach might need to help you answer that question if you're not sure how much time you need to put in. But try to think about your goal timeline and work backwards. Also, just be realistic with yourself. Don't be like this hero ambitious, like, oh, I'm going to turn into a morning person if I never was. Like, if you're a night owl, or if you think weekends are best, or you think a lunch break is best, like, try to iterate and tweak your own schedule, but like, be realistic with like what's going to feel good, and start small too. Don't be like, oh, I'm going to do 10 hours a week or whatever. If that's not, like, start small, like 20 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day, something feasible, where you can just start slowly chipping away at it. And then you can more easily increase those goals. And just iterating. I think accountability, it's all about iteration. Like, I'm a big Google Calendar person, but just like try something. There's so many tools out there. Like, try one, and on a weekly basis, just reflect and say, like, did this work? Did I actually pay attention to it? Or do I need to tweak it up, change it, and see what else, you know, how I can do this differently in a way that's going to work for me? That's what I did. And then after a few weeks of trying new things, all of a sudden it's just going to work. But everyone's different in terms of the types of tools that they like. So just keep trying new and different things. And then before you know it, you're going to have that system that just keeps you on track. Or another way to think about it is like, what do you use either for work or for your life to actually just organize yourself and try to just work this into systems that already work for you?
I love it. I love it. You're dropping a lot of knowledge, and we've only got 3 minutes left. So I would love to give you the final word. Let us know what you're working on right now, what you want to, call our attention to, how we can connect with you when we finish this conversation. Oh, great. You dropped the link here. I also, folks, I dropped a link to Rachel's previous chat in the chat box again, so that she went over in detail a lot of things there. So I would definitely recommend looking at that again, maybe rewatching this one. Rachel, leave us with some food for thought. You've already dropped a lot of knowledge, but again, what do we need to start chewing on right now when we end this conversation? And then let folks know how they can connect with you.
Yes. So my website's there. I always offer a free initial call. So feel free to set up one-on-one time if you want to talk about you and where you're at and how I can help. And what else do I want to leave you with? That you can and should find a job you love. It is beneficial to be in a career, even just for your wealth, your success, your well-being. All of these things are really tied to being engaged at work. So just know that it's possible, know that it's beneficial, know that it's feasible, and give yourself the space to just explore until you feel good. And then you can go apply as much as you want, even though I would still recommend you network more than you spend time applying online. But just know that exploration is here for you. You can take comfort in the fact that you're just figuring it out. You're in a phase, you're in a mode of that exploration until you feel confident. And that's when you can go after it and really forge forward on applying and all of those other things.
I love that. And I would even say, I consider myself a lifelong learner, and I would hope that you all do as well, as we are all Homo sapiens, learning all the time, and, the industry is always changing. So maybe this is something we just continue to do, whether we are like actively looking at career change, shift into or pivot into another thing, or just we know that since I am, a lifetime learner, eventually maybe I want to do some other things. So just starting right now to do those exercises of self-reflection, exploration, all these things, so that when that time comes, you've already got that, and you've already, walked that path. So Rachel, thank you so much. We're getting a lot of folks writing here in the chat that this has been very helpful. I'm happy that you all could attend this event. I definitely recommend reaching out to Rachel. For those of you who are rewatching this, I'm just going to verbally say the website out loud so you can connect with Rachel. It's iamwoken.com. So iamwoken.com. Reach out to Rachel. And thank you all again for joining. I hope that you all were able to connect with some folks who dropped their LinkedIns above. I will just hold this open for one more minute, just in case you just scroll up and open some of those LinkedIns. And Rachel, thank you so much. I hope to have you back again. It's always a pleasure to just pick your brain and to see the great work that you're doing in this field. That, it's beautiful to see that people are wanting to change things up and, listen to themselves more instead of doing it because of whatever the social norm says we should do. So I appreciate you all. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everyone. All right, we'll see you on the next chat. Ciao.